Welcome to the first plenary session. It is a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Tim Jensen. He's a well-known professor in the field of history of religions, with a distinguished career spanning over 44 years. His contribution to the history of religions, research, and scholarship have been profound and far-reaching. Jensen's expertise lies at the intersection of didactics of the study of religions, related methodology and theory, human rights and religion, law and religion, state and religion, religions and nature, ecology and climate crisis. He has made significant advancements through his innovative research, insightful analysis, and impactful application. As an accomplished academic, Professor Jensen has held various prestigious positions through his career. He has served as a faculty member at renowned institutions such as the University of Southern Denmark and Leibniz Universität, Hannover, where he has mentored numerous students and inspired future generations of scholars. His dedication to teaching and academic excellence has earned him the respect and admiration of colleagues and students alike. In addition to his scholarly pursuits, Professor Jensen is actively engaged. He is president of the International Association of the History of Religions, Deputy Secretary General of International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences, Conseil International de la Philosophie et des Sciences Humaines. He is frequently served after a keynote speaker at international conferences and symposiums, where he shares his expertise and insights with audiences from around the globe. In summary, Professor Tim Jensen is a distinguished scholar, a dedicated educator, and a passionate advocate for advancing knowledge and promoting positive change. His contribution to history of religions have been immense, and his influence continues to shape the future of this area of study. Today, he will speak to us on the subject, nature of the climate crisis, why it matters for scholars of religion. Dear Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is this on? No?
Okay, yes.
Now it is.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And thanks to the Dean, to the chair of this conference organization. And I want to say a few words sort of on a personal note. The first time I was in Complutense a long time ago, invited by a colleague of mine from the International Association for the History of Religions, Montserrat Abou-Malhammas. I gave a talk on Islam and later published an article about Islam in Denmark, or discourses on Islam. It was a pleasure being here, and I'm very happy to be back, especially invited also by this prestigious Institute for Religious Studies. I have a special sort of affection for Spain and Spanish scholarship, also because it is sort of history of religions in many ways, in the old-fashioned way with philology, an important part. And I was very happy yesterday to have dinner with Jesus de la Villa, who is, I think, still the president of the organization in Spain for philology. I'm very pleased to be here, and this institute, and I don't know how many of you realize that, is quite special in Spain, because in Spain you normally do not have, as we have in Denmark, or places in the United States. I've noticed a lot of scholars here from the States, departments for the study of religions. So this is a special thing, because elsewhere it is included in philology or history, etc., which also makes sense. I personally think that it's a good idea to have specific departments for the study of whatever we call it, of religion. And I also want to tell you that I've been invited several times by the Spanish Society for what is called Sciences of Religion, which is also noteworthy, that they speak not of the study of religion, but of sciences, in plural, of religions. Anyway, I'm pleased to be here. Thanks to everybody. Now, I have made maybe a very strange subject to be part of this conference on the theme, and I hope it will be evident to you how I read the theme or how I chose to read the theme, because you can read it in many ways. I have modified the title a little bit, so you can see that it says religion, religions, nature and the climate crisis, why it matters for some scholars, not all, of course. And I will just go on with this. Now, first of all, I want to tell you that when I picked this subject, it's not just because of whatever. It's because I actually know a little bit about it. And I started to study religion and the environmental crisis as one of the first ones, I think, on Earth. Bron Taylor, whom I will sort of lean up against very often in this talk, he also published an article, I think one of his first, in 1991. In 1991, I and a colleague, we published the first book in Denmark on religion and the environmental crisis. And I was prompted to start to look into this because of the WWF Alliance of Conservation and Religion, or Religion and Conservation, that started with an event in Assisi in 1986. So that's why I picked this rather than, for instance, having religion in movement, in motion, whatever, in regard to digitalization or globalization or migration, etc. So that's the reason why. So I have sort of been a stakeholder in this up to a certain period of time. I like to start things and do new things and open new doors, but then I move on to the next door. Somebody else would have stayed in this business and maybe made a career on studying religion and environment and nature. I did not, but I have been trying to see what has happened after my time, so to speak. This was a book that we published in Danish, Guld and Grønne Skove. It's sort of like Guld and Rose Gardens or something, and it's translated into God and Green Forests, Religions and Conservation. And you can see there is a sort of a front page here made by a Danish cartoonist. I come from the kingdom of cartoons, as you know, from the Muhammad crisis. And this person here is one of the cartoonists, one of the dailies in Denmark. And when we had a big event within the framework of the WWF in Copenhagen in 1990, he drew this picture in one of the big national dailies of Jesus Christ and others walking in a dump with all the garbage, sort of like this. And I will come back. He has drawn other cartoons later on. This is also just to introduce who I am and from where I come. I was introducing that I do something quite often about religion and law, state and religion. And I also do a lot about the notion of religion and human rights. I cooperate with the European Master of Human Rights in Venice at Lido, and I give lectures there because the notion of religion and human rights articles is an interesting thing. And I normally also tell people that Denmark is a strange place. Quite often, and I think now we have some Americans, there is a sociologist of religion, Zuckerman, I think he's called. He considers Denmark sort of the kingdom of the most irreligious people on earth. I do not. I disagree totally. I think Danes are extremely Protestant to such a degree that they don't even realize it. And also, I want to tell you that in Denmark, we have in our passports, this should come as a shock for at least Americans, we have what is called the baptismal record of Denmark, or the birth certificate of Denmark, which is an image from a runic stone erected by a king who said, "I made the Danes Christians." So even I, who is not a member of the Danish church, I'm baptized, but that's not my will, that was my parents. I have this Jesus Christ in my passport. At the same time as in Denmark, everybody says that religion is a private matter. But of course, it's no more private that it is the roots of our Danish identity. That's why it's in the passport. So just to say that, I have more about Denmark, but I won't do it now because I want to get to this. But just this small thing when we talk about religion and what it is, and visible and invisible. I'm very fond of this quotation here, Marx on Luther, saying that Luther removed the servitude of devotion by replacing it by the servitude of conviction, destroyed faith in authority by restoring the authority of faith, He turned priests into laymen by turning laymen into priests. He liberated man from exterior religiosity by making man's inner conscience religious. He emancipated the body from chains by enchaining the heart. And then I add that's most likely why there was not a lot of protest in Denmark when they inserted this Jesus Christ in the passports. Because we have an established church, but in Denmark, the church is not a real religion, it's culture. While the Muslims, of course, they have religion. It's just to sort of indicate that all of these things matters when we look at things like background with regard to the subject, but also with regard to religion and Denmark. Now, this is also sort of an introduction. I'll come back to this. You can see there is a guy who has been nailed, not on the crucifix, but on a wind turbine, and he is saying, God is green. And then there is a minister of the Danish church who has nailed him to it. And it's also from a Danish cartoon. Of course, we are so good at cartoons. And it has to do with something I'll come back to. But that's also a Danish thing. So we have the established church, and sometimes we have an established church, part of which will say that green is good. But then we have an established church when then wind turbines are going to be placed near the church. They will say, no way, we don't want these wind turbines. So there are all these paradoxes and things going on. Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm a scholar of religion, so I cannot just move on and start talking about religion, the study of religion, nature, climate, whatever, without defining the terms and telling you what I think they should mean. It's not just descriptive, it's also kind of normative. Who decides what is the study of religion? That's a constant struggle. So I put my whatever it is into this. My first sort of quote is from Bruce Lincoln, University of Chicago, from an article on culture, where he then defines religion as culture, but as a specific kind of culture. What religion does, and this I submit that is Bruce Lincoln, is its defining characteristic is to invest specific human preferences with transcendent status by misrepresenting them as revealed truth, primordial traditions, divine commandments, and so forth. I'll not go into the very remarkable misrepresenting, which is really not very common in the study of religion. I have my own here. Religion is a cultural subsystem differing from others such by way of a reference to a postulated more than human and more than natural. Religion and nature, we can come back to that, maybe something, power of being, scriptures, ancestors, but also what could be subsumed in a sort of definition of spirituality, sort of an enlightened, higher and better human being, a developed or liberated self. Now, when it comes to the definition of spirituality, I sort of looked at what Bron Taylor has written, because he knows more about it with regard to religion and nature, and religion and, for instance, eco-spiritualities. And I think this is important when you have a conference where you have both the notion of religion and spirituality, because as a scholar of religion, I think it's the same. And this is also what Bron Taylor said. It's an insider's differentiation, but that insider's differentiation is also worthwhile noticing and taking heed of. So in contemporary parlance, people increasingly speak of spirituality rather than religion when trying to express what moves them most deeply. Many consider the two to be distinctly different. Most of the characteristics scholars associate with religion, however, are found whether people consider themselves spiritual or religious. From a family resemblance perspective, therefore, there is little analytical reason to assume these are different kinds of social phenomena. It is important, however, to understand what most people understand the distinction to entail, especially because the term spirituality is more often than religion associated with nature and nature religions, and that is why I also make this. So religion normally used to refer to organized and institutional religious belief and practice, while spirituality is normally held to involve deepest moral values and profound, as it is called, religious experiences. But then there are also additional ideas more often associated with spirituality than religion. For instance, the personal growth, the gaining of proper understanding, and to be intertwined, for instance, with here, environmentalist concern and action. And as he then notes, This contrasts markedly with the world's predominant religions, which are generally concerned with transcending this world or obtaining divine rescue for it. This is, of course, a generalization. This is what we have to do from time to time. I think this is not quite so if you look really at matters on the ground. Lots of people within the so-called world religions or these world rejecting, they are not. They are living here. They want to eat. They want to have sex. They want to have sleep. They want to be free from pain. They are not just focused on the other world or salvation, but this is what we normally say. And here you can see that, again, spiritual but not religious. It's just important, and it's important for our subject. Now, nature is also something in need of definition, of course. And this is one of the whole things that I'm interested in when we talk about religions in movement and religions and environment and nature. That is how these religions, be it the world religions or other religions, how they have to reinvent themselves and to reinterpret their scriptures, traditions, in order to get forward to something that corresponds to what today is called nature. I mean, Buddha did not walk around in nature. He simply did not. But at the same time, he did. And so there is all this. So what do I mean when I say nature? And I want to take again and follow in the footsteps of Conseil and say from his Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature from 2005, which is a seminal work. Nature itself can be, for our purposes, understood simply. Nature is that world which includes, but at the same time is perceived to be largely beyond our human bodies and which confronts us daily with its apparent otherness. Again, a generalization. We, who are we? And what about indigenous people, etc., who is also in the focus? Are they also confronted with the otherness of this environment? Well, leading theories today would say they are not in the same way. Anyway, Collins' dictionary, nature is all the animals, plants, and other things in the world that are not made by people and all the events and processes that are not caused by people. Again, I would say you can also have cultivated nature. In Denmark, I don't know if we have 2% of nature that is not cultivated. That's all. We have to look for it. It's all cultivated nature. Anyway, so again, study of religion. I mentioned sciences of religion here in Spain. What is it? It's something that we are fighting about. I have my vision for the right study of religion within the IAHR. I know what it is and what it is not. I don't want any confessional, apologetical, or any similar concerns mixed into the study of religion that I promote as the president of the IAHR. But when I go around the world, I will have people, even amongst the members of the IAHR, who will disagree. But they are still members because they think that this is what they're doing at the IAHR. They may do different things in their own countries and as individual scholars, but there is a platform for this kind of study of religion. Now, I would say something about the critical course. Again, we have scholars from the United States. Critical religion is sort of popular there, not least due to Ross McCutcheon from Alabama. But I would say that a disciplined study of religion is critical for several reasons. One is that the point of departure is that religion, any religion, is a human and therefore historical and social phenomenon to be researched and approached with the use of all the relevant theories and methods that we normally use when we study this. There is no difference when we study religion. It's approached as a human, historical, and social construct, a dependent variable. The point of departure in terms of the term critical is this: humans create gods, not the other way around, and scholars study gods and religions to find out more about humans, including evolution, nature, culture, and the relationship between nature and culture, social and historical formations and developments. This is also why this is, I think, important to the study of religion, what is happening in terms of environment, nature, climate crisis, and religions. That's because here we see changes, at least some degree of changes, and we study changes. We study historical developments. Critical also means that religious texts, artifacts, behaviors, and claims are not taken at face value, but analyzed and contextualized, inter alia, to figure out what they might have meant 1,000 years ago to those who produced them and to those supposed to decode and inherit them, or what they and new texts and artifacts might mean to contemporaries. It means looking for meanings and functions and explanations that might have to do with normal human stuff. For instance, the exercise and authorization of power, identity formation, social formation, and the like. All of this might not be in line with the insider's self-understanding. That's another reason why it is critical. But then again, I'm not sort of into critical religion, studying only religion in discourses, or religion and the sacred and notions and identity and authorization. I'm an old-fashioned, I'm 73, historian of religions. And I simply think I could philosophize or lean up against philosophers, Schilbrack, for instance, critical realist. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a philosopher of science, but I simply think, like Michael Pye here, that there are things out there that I can identify as religious in contrast to things that are not religious. It's very simple. And I think that we can make things a little bit too complicated sometimes, being too philosophical and methodologically skeptical. I mean, I think there are good reasons to say that some buildings or actions or people or thoughts could be seen as stand out as not just profane or whatever you want to call it, non-religious, but as something that may be termed religious. A church building is a building, but it's also a specific kind of building, built for a specific purpose. That is not just to come in and eat and drink or sit and listen. There are some things that could be identified as religious. Michael Pye in 1998, he was also a president of the IAHR at one time, wrote, I think, also a very straightforward sort of oppositional mail to the list maintained by University of California, Santa Barbara back in the 90s, where he said, however, I would assert that along with quite a lot of others, I study religions, and that we are, in a provisional sense at least, able to define the field. Otherwise, we couldn't do it. Religions is not the same as rabbits, banks, the oil industry, etc. So, okay, just to say that this is where I am. And finally, I will sort of stop this part of it. I cannot but share with you one of my most sort of wonderful memories when I was sitting in the kitchen with the very famous Jonathan C. Smith, who was very famous inter alia for saying there is no data for religion. And we asked him about that, and he said, I wish I could have had a dime for every quote of that. And sort of, relativizing his own very famous saying. And then a little later in the morning, it knocked on the door, and he didn't go and open it. And he said, it's data knocking on the door. And it was someone belonging to the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is how primitive I am from time to time. It was not just somebody selling toothpaste, right? Okay. So back to this. The forerunners for a study of religions-based engagement with this. Lynn White, most of you who know anything about religion and nature, environment, have heard about this. And he was looking back in '67 at what he called the historical roots of our ecological crisis. And it is to him beyond doubt that Western Christianity is the most sinful of all religions as regards the religious, theological, spiritual, value-based roots of the crisis. And later on, he suggested actually that St. Francis of Assisi be made a patron saint of ecology, and he was. And he also sort of pointed in a direction that the WWF later took up when they started their alliance of religion and conversation. We have Toynbee, and Toynbee thinks sort of more broadly that it's not just Christianity, it's monotheism, or the monotheistic religions. So there is a monotheistic fall, agricultural fall, monotheistic fall away from nature, so to speak, and animism. And he points sort of to the kind of other religions, especially sort of the pantheistic religious worldviews, for instance, in the Eastern traditions. That would be where we could look for models that could be used fruitfully to reinvent the relationship to nature. So both see a problem based on religion, and both see a solution, once again, based on religion, but another kind of religion. And the final one I mentioned, Abbey, an American writer, he thinks that what we should look at is the indigenous religions. So here you have solutions and problems, and the final one is, of course, not a problem, because everybody so far has seen the indigenous people as the one who really practiced kinds of religions that were nature friendly. We know also, scholars of religion, that this does not hold all the time. They might have extremely nice ceremonies where they honor the bear, but at the end of the day, they kill it. Right? So we know that they have lived also eco-friendly, but it may have to do not only with their worldview, but also with the fact that there were not that many people. All of this is what we study. All of this is what we discuss. Other beginnings, I established a consultancy on religion and education and culture in '86, inspired by an English or UK-based one, in order not least to work together with the Worldwide Fund for Nature on religion and conversation and conservation. In 1991, we also saw the American Academy actually set up a unit on religion and ecology. And in '90, we had an event in Copenhagen on this, arranged by me and some colleagues. So things are starting to move in the early '90s. In the mid-'90s, we have Tucker and Grimm in the United States setting up the Center for the Study of World Religions, or the Religions of the World and Ecology. We have a forum on religion and ecology later on Yale. We have conferences, we have publications. UK also had a lot of series of publications of the various religions and environment and nature, etc. You had Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature, Oxford Handbook, etc. And in 2005 or 6, Bron Taylor set up a Society for the Study of Religion, Nature and Culture, now an affiliate to the IAHR, and also a journal for the study of religion, nature and culture, which I consider a very important journal when we talk about what is in this for the scholar of religion. We have a journal which is very interesting, and they have conferences each and every year or each and every second year. Religion, and more specifically climate, came up, according to Taylor, not earlier than 2014, when they started to talk about it at the American Academy of Religion annual conference or annual meeting. Until then, only scant scholarly attention focused on religion and climate change. Yes, so that's sort of it. And then back to what I did myself. I was interested in the bigger religions, so-called world religions, because of that was what the WWF was doing. I was also interested in these religions because they are the most sort of dominant ones around the world. They have the highest number of adherents, and thus, in theory, the highest potential in terms of manpower, but also the highest potential in terms of changing from within themselves, of trying to see the world in a different way than what they had done before. So they had to reinvent themselves in order to update themselves and be relevant with regard to this crisis. And this is what religions have to do. They have to constantly reinvent themselves and update themselves in order to keep alive. If not, they will pass away. If they do not educate people, that's one thing. They have to new generations. But the other thing is that they have to speak to people of today. So they had to do something. So I thought that it was interesting for that reason, but also simply because it gave me and my colleague an opportunity as scholars of religion to look over the shoulders of religious people, whether theologians or others, and see into their workshops. What were they doing? What kind of reinterpretations took place within the framework of this religion and conservation, whatever it was, right? into where these workshops where religious traditions are constantly reinvented, renewed, made relevant. That was my sort of motivation as a scholar. I admit I had also sort of some kind of inspiration from being citizen Jensen in the late 80s and early 90s, who was also worried about the environmental crisis and the ecological crisis. So I'm not just a scholar, I'm also a human being. And this is something that I'll just touch upon, but it's interesting also when we talk about changing our religions in motion. What part do scholars play? Do scholars create religions? Do scholars create movements within religion? Yes, sometimes scholars do, or at least help do it. Is that the role of a scholar? To be an activist and engaged in such a way as to participate in religious changes? Maybe not, maybe it's impossible not to. Anyway, again, lots of people have sort of uttered criticism saying that none of the world religions had ever hosted concepts of nature, etc., when they were born. But in a way, that criticism misses the most important fact about religion, namely that they are dynamic, that they are cultural variables, that they are constantly changing. And then I say mountains may not move, but religions do. And this is why, of course, we come back to the overall theme of movement. And then again, a disclaimer. Just want to make sure that nobody thinks that Tim Jensen sitting up here has an essentialist notion of religions. Religions don't move anywhere. Religions don't go to war. It's not Islam going to war anywhere. It's not Christianity going to war anywhere. It's human beings. No religion does anything. It is only human beings, and those are the ones who constitute the religions. And scholars of religion, we study all of this. We study all of these movements, well knowing that religions do not move. Lots of examples, what I think is in it, what I find intriguing, studying the greening of religions or the degrees to which they green. We have lots of new empirical material, text, for instance, theological, exegetical, reinterpretations, primary sources of scriptures, cosmogonies, theologies, anthropogonies, the whole dominion text, stewardship, and all of that. We see change, we see people work with it, comparison between the cosmogony of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament and the Enuma Elish. What's the difference? We have Indo-European cosmogonies. How do they relate to the contemporary views of religion, nature, and anthropology, cosmology? We have lots of new sort of discussions about, for instance, indigenous ontologies, epistemologies. And we have secondary sources that are worthwhile looking at, for instance, the Assisi declarations, as well as all the other texts on religion, nature, and climate crisis. We have not only texts, we have rituals. We can go and watch and see how some Jews, at least, or some Christians, reinterpret their own traditions, be it the Mass, communion, be it the Sukkot, if we move to Judaism, Shavuot, or if we move to Hinduism, the Vrindavan, the pilgrimage there where people take along trees and plant them. So we have lots of stuff to look at and to analyze. And this is something I like. I like to analyze things. Then, of course, we have the whole question, who amongst the religions, who within the religions, who, whether it's the elite or it's the sort of non-educated who takes part in this, who takes part in this, if at all taking part? Do they take part only in theory? Do they write a lot of declarations, but then do nothing extra, nothing real about it? Is it all words and few actions? That's not, words can be very sort of powerful, but still, it's all there for us to study and to look at. Now, a parenthesis when I said who takes part of it, how much do they do? We start to look at that already in 2014 around the world. You have some names up here. What really is happening out there in the real world? And Taylor, he said that, well, extant research does not provide evidence of any strong search and support among religious believers on behalf of any particular environmental cause. There is some evidence that at least some within the world's religious traditions are becoming deeply concerned about environmental degradation and anthropogenic climate change and intend to make ameliorating and adapting to it a priority issue. But it's not much. That was in 2015. I will come back to a later one. Again, which forms and kinds of engagement? Are they militant? Do we have sort of dark green religion where a lot of people simply say enough is enough? We have to resacralize all nature, and all our relationship to nature has to be totally changed, and we don't want to buy into any compromises. We have compromised too long. If I'm in Denmark now and I look at what politicians say about what they do to prevent more climate change, I think they lie. I'm 73, but sometimes I still feel like I'm 16. And what do I want to do? I want to go hit those politicians. I want to tell them that they are liars, that they are frauds, that they don't do their job. Because nothing really is happening, even in big Denmark. But they tell everybody that they are so green. Just like some of the religions, right? So I can see why some dark green religionists don't buy into, for instance, the world religious traditions declarations when nothing is really happening. So this is another thing, right? What kind of clashes do we see within the religious traditions between activists, militants, and radicals and others? And what other kind of theological sort of clashes do we see? We see quite a lot. So you can also see here, do people think that this is a really radical change from what we were earlier in Christianity, in Islam, right? Or do they see it as in line with their tradition? To what a degree is it possible to develop without diverging from the origins or the imagined origins, etc.? For instance, also another question, do those engaged see scientifically based knowledge as something that used to be or were actually embedded in their sacred traditions, even if it was not explicitly so? And therefore also think that scientific approaches to nature is what is absolutely needed also for religious people to deal with this? Or do they think that they can just pray, right? Fortunately, they don't think that they can just pray. They have to do something more than pray. And then, of course, how do they deal with sort of clashes between religious notions of purity and then notions of pollution? When they go into the Ganges or into Yamuni rivers in India and think that these are pure, how do they feel when they come out of these waters with bodies that have been actually, polluted, right? How does this work in heads of people? I think these are all fascinating studies that we can do as scholars. A clash that I'll read from Bron Taylor's 1991 first article, where he was just as early as I was in this. One, both proponents and opponents of Earth First, that's one of the radical movements, recognize the importance of religion in environmental conflicts. One extreme example can be found in a letter purportedly from the person who bombed the car of California Earth Firstler Judy Barry, who, quoting Genesis 1:26, the Dominion creation story, wrote this, and I quote, "This possessed pagan demon, Judy Barry, demon, told the multitude that trees were not God's gift to man, but that trees were themselves gods, and it was a sin to cut them. So I felt the power of the Lord stir within my heart, and I knew I had been chosen to strike down this demon." The letter concludes, end quote, the letter concludes with a warning to other tree worshippers that they will suffer the same fate, for, quote, I am the Lord's avenger, unquote. So we have these heavy clashes that also can be interesting to follow in time. Here comes from Denmark, I have already indicated, a clash between parts of the established church that says that it's a green one, and then other parts that when it comes to wind turbines that should be good for climate, and these wind turbines are put close to the church, they have the right within the law to protest, and normally that protest will be listened to. So, because they don't think that a church and a wind turbine looks very good together. I agree, it looks terrible. But still, what do they mean about going green? And here you see another cartoonist who acts like this is God himself taking up this. And this is where I started. You can see God is green. No, get out of here. I'll nail you to your stupid wind turbine, right? Climate activist idiot. We have all these clashes. And then again, within the same church, very recently, 2024, in Denmark, oceans, no longer any fishes, dead and gone because of pollution or whatever it's called from the agricultural farmers. It's dead. Some of the fjords in Denmark, there is nothing there anymore. The government says that they will react, they don't. And some climate activists are getting very tired. And they allied themselves with a minister in a local church nearby, Vejle, and then they had a burial ceremony that she was sort of heading, and she gave a sermon. And it was sort of a burial ceremony, the burial of the dead Danish fjord and sea. And you can see that she's standing there in her attire, and you have the coffin there and sort of things like that. So that's another way a church minister can react and do something that has to do with this. Again, what do we have that we scholars of religion can look at? New kinds of nature religions, new kinds of spiritualities, new kinds of animisms. We have neo-animisms, also driving theory, not just empirical studies. We have neo-paganisms, neo-shamanisms, new kinds of syncretisms, etc. We have ecofeminism. So lots of things blooming from this greening of religions, even if it's to a smaller degree than some could hope for. Other stuff we can look at, how do they work together with people, etc., etc. I will not have time for that. Coming back to the overall theme of the conference, this quote is from the 2015 Erfurt IAHR World Congress. The hosts, Christoph Bochera and Jörg Rüttke, wrote about religion as a dynamic sort of phenomenon. And then here you will find that the degree of change, of course, might vary widely. Religious traditions are invented and reinvented. They might be imperceptibly transformed, violently reformed, or emphatically defended and petrified. That's what I read also when you talk about religions at rest. That's also religions resenting development and changes. And then we are at the end here. Yes, we still have Assisi projects like here. Terra Laudato Si, yes, and we have somebody there, a nice minister in a nice green garden. But on the other hand, still, Taylor in 2019 and 20 is adamant on this. There is almost no visible evidence that the bigger religions are really moving. It's very small steps by a few groups and a few individuals, but the vast majority within the religions, they don't move. Maybe, he says, there is some hope with the dark green spiritualities, but that's it. And they are up against not only all the world religions, but up all against the majority society. So he thinks that, yeah, he says, endly, yeah, ideas and practices endemic to world religions that hinder environmental mobilization movement, the power and nature of the world's prevailing ideologies, and the shrinking time for effective action all darken the prospect that any particular religion or alliance among them will arise soon enough to avert the collapse of the Earth's biocultural systems. And then we are back at the beginnings. All the good academic scholarly reasons given, plus the extra academic hopes of some engaged scholars, citizens, that a greening of religions might take place and might change things, might move more people, politicians, and the world in the direction of a better world. Then, of course, as always, some of us also are not just engaged scholars studying, engaged citizens trying to help things change to the better, but we are, of course, also out there making a living out of our scholarship and engagement. I made quite a lot of money when I worked for the World Wild Fund for Nature on religion and conservation. They paid me a wonderful salary for a work year with the religions. It was not just because I like to sit with Jews and Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists and Christians. It was because I was paid for it. And writing this book and writing articles is part of what I have to do for a career, meaning for a living. So that's also what we have to remember from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim Jensen, for this inspiring lesson. I think there should be some commentaries or answers or questions about this. Please. Yes.
Have you had any opportunity to work with Karen Armstrong's famous book on nature and religion? Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. And I guess I have to admit, maybe you have already discovered that I normally speak my mind. Karen Armstrong is normally not on my reading list because I think she's into another kind of study of religion than I am. I think that she's into apologetics, and that's her choice, and she's free to do that, and maybe I think she's good at that. And I think sometimes, for instance, let's say, some of the world religions are in need of some support. I'm talking about Islam, for instance, but yeah, and nature could also be in support of or in need of some support. So I'm full, but that's probably why I have not read it on my tip.
I thought it was interesting that she had a book on that, and then her latest book on Islam. Her biggest surprise on that was that she thought she would educate the world on Islamic faith, and really she ended up, they thanked her for educating themselves. And her latest book on nature surprised me, and I really enjoyed it. So, yeah. And I loved it.
I didn't say anything in particular about Islam and this because I didn't go into any of the sort of religions and how they deal with this. But I don't think Islam is so different from Christianity. I mean, in Christianity, when I was in Hannover, having my professor there, each and every day going to lecture, I passed this. It was a children's place, sort of a school place, where it says, "Allein Gott in der Höhe sei Ehre," right? That it's only God who is deserving of respect or worship, right? And it could be the same in Islam. These things, this is of course why we have the idea that the monotheistic religions have been bad for nature, right? Because then nature is down there and God is up there and we only worship God. And I came when I had to do with Muslims in Denmark as a scholar, I of course picked the right Muslims. I picked the Muslims who could see an idea of participating in this. I didn't pick the other ones, but there were other ones. And I have come across, of course, Muslims who said, "Do you think that we are worshiping elephants, man?" Right? No, we are not. So stay away with this. But again, you have back years, decades. I think he's called Hossein Syed Nasr or something, living in the United States, writing about this in the 60s. You have other declarations, also Muslim declarations on religion and nature. So Muslims have been working on this theme also. But the problem there is the same as with the other religions. But I mean, again, I said I was from Denmark. And I mentioned I was here giving a lecture on Islam in Denmark back in the early 90s. Nothing is changing in Denmark when it comes to Islam. And I've just finished an article again on activism within scholarship of religion. And most people will think that because I'm the president of the IAHR, I'm not pro-activist scholarship. No, I'm not as a president, but I have different hats. As a scholar and citizen, I am. And I think you cannot study Islam in Denmark. You cannot be a scholar of religion in Denmark except or without getting engaged and being sort of an apologetic for Islam. Because the Islamophobia in Denmark, as elsewhere, is so terrible that people outside Denmark hardly can believe it. And at the same time, you have the same politicians who are anti-Muslim to a degree that it's almost sick. They are pro-Christian to the same sickening degree. They think that they can prove that each and every good value in Denmark has its roots in Christianity, which is a lie. But they write articles about it. So religion is a private matter for Muslims. Oh, no, I mean, yeah, because Muslims mix religion and politics. But we mature Christians, we don't. At the same time as Christianity is all over the place, we think or we say in terms of identity. So that is just my answer to you, to sort of develop it into the theme of this. I think it's important to also discuss matters like that. Other questions?
My question. Yeah, my question has a lot to do with human motivation, incentives. I've been a student of psychology and religion interaction before, and I like to see what motivates human beings. Is it intrinsic motivation, extrinsic, are we altruistic? What motivates a corporation to not pollute? What motivates an individual to recycle? And so how do we kind of blend with that? People think if we're part of one united body in the world, we're all connected, okay, then we be incentivized to help. So really, those are some of my thoughts, and I'm very curious about the studies you have done with regards to incentivizing people to think it matters to take action.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned the potential in terms of manpower within the big religious traditions. But when the Worldwide Fund for Nature looked at it and started their Assisi and the Alliance of Religion and Conservation, they did not look only at the numbers, potential numbers in favor of the cause. They did, of course, look at what I call the advantages, or maybe advantages of, let's call it religious ethics, in contrast to philosophical ethics. Namely that when you talk about ethics within the religious traditions, there is a level above the human being. Meaning that you could hope that people who were thinking in terms of punishment, or the opposite, or thinking in terms of the karmic consequences, bad or good, of what you're doing, if they realized that what they did in terms of not being careful as regards nature and the environment, that if they were sort of having a divine being or some ancestors or something else looking at them when they were not recycling, when they were, then it would be a motivation. I thought that myself too when I had these religious leaders of Denmark, Copenhagen gathered. How could they sort of convince their fellow religious people that they had to do this in order to be a good Muslim, in order to be a good Christian, etc. And I thought that was powerful. That could be powerful. But there is another thing to it that I have regretted that I did not pay more attention to back in 1990. I was also young at that time. But that was the whole question about authority. Because I, of course, engaged the authorities within the religions, the ministers, the imams, the rabbi, etc. What's the relationship between them and the ordinary people in the congregation? So I was playing sort of the game of the elite. I was playing the game of the authorities, figuring that if some imam stood up on a Friday afternoon and in his Friday prayer and sermon said something about nature, then it would work because he was the authority. And well, that's good enough. But on the other hand, I'm not sort of subscribing to the idea of the authorities having a lot of authority. So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak. But you're right, there ought to be there. And we have seen examples of this, for instance, in Buddhist nature projects, where you could sort of have a statue of Buddha or Bodhisattva or whatever erected in a forest, trying to prevent people from cut down the forest, because that was, yeah, you could say the divine being, even if I know it could be from, who would sort of scare the hell out of them, right? So they wouldn't do it. That's also part of a motivation. Okay.
Yes. Other question? Yes,
Um,
please.
I thought-
Microphone.
I don't have a question. I would like to comment on what you said about the bear as a totem animal and then killing the bear. I specialize in Southern African religions, and in Southern African countries, shamanism is abundant and it influences Christianity all around. And one of the main duties of shamans, which are 90% of them are Christians from various factions, is protecting so-called Mother Nature. At the same time, they do animal sacrifices, but this is always done in a very protective way towards the animal. So they get some hurt, they are a little bit dizzy, it's just one move of the macheta and the animal is dead without suffering. It's not like in Europe when we, murder those animals for several hours. So they protect the nature, and at the same time they take the lives if they want to appease ancestors, for example. But the meat is never wasted, so it's also shared with the people, especially the poorest ones. So I think it's a nice combination of protecting the nature and being a part of it, because most humans actually eat meat. So if this is from a sacrificial animal, then you combine taking care of nature with religion and with some dietary restrictions. Thank you.
I'm in total agreement with you. I was a little short or brief when I mentioned that. I'm in total agreement. And I think most scholars of religion also are in agreement when it comes to that. It's a very practical, matter-of-fact relationship also, but it is, of course, something that has to be also directed by respect, or mutual respect. That's also why I talked about the new animisms. You're sort of coming into that also, where it's not a question of Tyler's sort of belief in spiritual beings. Spiritual beings, it's too anthropocentric in a way. There are some kind of personhood, there are some kind of mutual communication between human beings, animals, and the nature, and the rest of nature. And that is part of the difference. And when it comes to this matter about sacrifice, of course, yes, you have to get some proteins also. So it's also part of the ecological cycle. You have to get some protein. I have vegetarian food 4 days a week, but I know I need a steak from time to time. So yeah, I mean, that's also, if you look at Greek religion, it was part of the whole idea of the bloody sacrifices, also to provide people with meat, because it's good to have from time to time. So I think you're totally right.
And the last one, please.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I want to speak about the indigenous religions, like animism, I think she was speaking about, but then I'm talking also about other things that are important in the indigenous religions. I belong to an indigenous community, though I'm also a Christian. But in India, I'm from India, Delhi, and the term that we use for tribal, for indigenous people is tribal Christian. So what I want to say is, should we not go back to the tribal religions or to the tribal way of life, to the world view, where nature is venerated and it is protected by the tribal people. This is a very big problem now in India, because in many of these areas which are inhabited by the tribal communities, indigenous people, like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and other places. states, these states, there's a lot of mining activity which is going on. And because of that, these villages, people are being completely evicted from the land, and the mining work is happening. And because of that, a lot of people are now being, the land is completely destroyed, forests cut, rivers polluted, and then there are these movements also which are happening in many tribal areas, and they are, fighting for Jal Jungle Jameen, that is land, forest, and water. Jal is water, land, jungle, forest, Jameen. Jameen is land. Jal Jungle Jameen. That is the slogan that we use always. So don't you think that this is something that we should look more, pay more attention to the indigenous way of life? And also, I think when animals, because just now she talked about animal sacrifice, well, it's not just animal sacrifice that happens in indigenous communities, but also hunting. Hunting is, open, allowed for, because they live in forests and they do need protein, as you just said. But at the same time, it is not hunting for the purpose of commercializing it, for storing it, for selling it. It's only for eating. They eat it and then that's over. They don't keep it, they don't want to sell it, they don't want to acquisition, that mindset of acquiring money, that is not there. So that is, I think, something very important. I think this consumeristic, this commercialization of property that is happening now, that is something that is very high. And that is the reason why I think a lot of, resources are being misused, abused.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Now, I mentioned that we had these people, we had Lynn White, we had Toynbee, and then we had one Abbey. They mentioned look towards our roots and reinterpret, look towards the non-monotheistic Asian traditions with pantheism. And the third one was look towards indigenous religions. And if you look at a term like animism, if you go to Religion and Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature by Bron Taylor from 2005, there is one on animism, Tyler, the sort of traditional animism. Then there is one by Graham Harvey on animism as understood today, new epistemologies, new ontologies working with that, Castro and others. I mentioned it, so that's there. There is a constant focus on indigenous religions, not least within dark green religions. And then, as we also wrote in this book on the big religions and nature and conservation in 1991, we have 4 pages on indigenous religions and their importance for these matters. So everybody has been extremely keen on this. You mentioned that they have become to a certain degree part of the bigger religious traditions. That's one thing. But the indigenous religions have been extremely important for everything that used to be called New Age spiritualities. So they have come into this in many ways. So they are there. So don't worry, they are there all over. But the problem is, of course, that you have to also study these indigenous religious traditions in scholarly ways to not run away with a lot of things that may not be actually true. So one thing is the Western idea about the indigenous. The other thing is indigenous peoples themselves. But of course, they have also played another role as actually issuing sort of authorities issuing declarations. I came across an Albuquerque declaration recently from North American indigenous people. So there are lots of declarations, and you have all the fighting about land and things like that, of course. And then last but not least, I mean, you still have around the world, not least Christians, but also others who are on a missionary tour still. And you go to rainforests and places in Borneo, etc. And you see indigenous people that have been, well, the Christians have tried to erase them from the surface of Earth, right? So that's also part of the big religious traditions, and not least Christianity, that it has really tried to get rid of all these people. That's also why, to come back to the Assisi thing, that the people who were on a pilgrimage, ecological pilgrimage to Assisi in 1986, when they came there with religious traditions, they were met by or confronted with a Maori from New Zealand, Maori warrior, who said, "Stop, you're not going to enter these sacred places if you have not paid attention to the crimes that you have committed earlier on towards indigenous people." So it's very much there. Okay, it's very much. I cannot click on this anymore, but there is in this presentation also 2 or 3 pages of references for those of you who want to look closer at this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We must conclude here. And let's remember that we have now a coffee break until 11, where we may share opinions, propose another questions to our plenarists, and let's enjoy the coffee. Thank you.